Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar in our Send Infuse series of webinars. This month, we're going to be talking about emerging risks and looking at what's coming next for the industry. So I've got a panel here who are going to be talking this one through. I'm going to be asking them to introduce themselves and talk about their background in this subject. But just to give you a feel for the kind of things that we're going to be covering, we're going to be trying to identify what are the big emerging risks in the insurance industry right now and how we're currently managing them, the difference between starting to manage them and where you're scaling up on managing them and the difficulties and differences associated with that. And also looking at some non-underwriting challenges that are going to inhibit insurers' ability to address emerging risks. So we've got 30 minutes. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to start off by introducing our panel, starting with Lauren O'Rourke, who's Exposure Manager for New Syndicates at Apollo. Lauren, welcome.
Thanks, Tony, and hi, everyone. And thank you very much to the Send team for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. So yeah, like Tony said, my name is Lauren O'Rourke. I'm the Exposure Manager for New Syndicates at Apollo. I've been managing exposure management teams for various size organisations across the market for the last 19 years and have been helping those businesses, and in particular the underwriters, understand the risks and manage the risks that they take on.
Great, thanks, Lauren. And second, and as part of our panel, Addy. Welcome to the panel. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you for having me, and hello, everyone. I'm Aditya Sanghvi. You can call me Addy. I'm an innovation manager at CFC, and recently I've been focusing on our brand new carbon insurance proposition. My background is in actuarial science, and prior to CFC, I worked in management consulting for several years, so have a good background in strategy and operations as well, in addition to actuarial.
Excellent. So we've really got the knowledge we need to be able to look at this subject in detail. So let's start just at a high level. What are the big emerging risks in the insurance industry today? Lauren, if I could start with you on that one.
Sure. Well, I think there's a few. It's safe to say that. And I think I've got a couple of examples that I've been thinking about, but I think one aspect to say about all emerging risks is actually the big thing is about how interconnected with other risks that they are. So that's one area. I think that it's not just the emerging risks, it's emerging risks interaction with existing risks and other emerging risks. So for example, the energy transition and the growth of the renewable energy sector, particularly with offshore wind, but obviously like solar farms as well. Now we know that there are huge planned projects and ambitious growth projects for transition to green energy in all world economies, but there's particular massive projects off the coast of the US and wind farms. The technology and the engineering involved in building these bigger and bigger structures obviously adds more risk because it's new technology. They have to withstand potential risks from climate change, from increased storms or increasingly intensive storms. And that level of emerging risks in the engineering that's involved and understanding not just the structures, but also the weather and the hazard and the wave motion, that all have an impact on the decisions around whether they're fixed or floating or lots and lots of different aspects of how they're going to build it and where they're going to build them. My second example is more around like the man-made catastrophe rather than the natural catastrophe focus, is around geopolitical instability, not just at the national and international level, but local level. We've seen, especially in recent times, more tension and more polarization across local, national elections across the globe. That leads to an increase in civil unrest, as we've unfortunately seen in this country. Now there's a national impact on that. So the national election changes and governmental changes may change global collaboration on things like security and trade and climate change and trying to solve the climate change problem. So we come back to the interconnected part again. And at the extreme level, when you get into civil unrest and terrorism, that has changed as well in its nature. So I think looking at those two different areas are probably things that I in my world, we talk about a lot.
Interesting, and I like the point you've made about the interaction of it. I hadn't really thought about the whole renewable piece and climate change, and you have to think about the where do you build your wind farms if climate change is changing. Really good point. Addy, what are your thoughts?
So I'd actually think about it in two ways. There's evolving risks, and then there's emerging risks. Now, given my function in the innovation team, the way I look at emerging risks is something net new. There's an opportunity to create new products. And the big ones in my mind there are the opportunities that come with the climate transition, so climate risk, and AI. AI, for example, I think it's still in early stages and it'll evolve over time, present new risks that we'll have to understand and address as a market. Same with the climate transition, that there's so much that the insurance industry has to do in terms of enabling the transition, and there's new risks popping up in all different ways. But on the other hand, there's evolving risks. So cyber, for example, geopolitical risks, for example, they're generally well understood, but they're so dynamic that they could change overnight. So understanding those changes, monitoring those changes is critical on both fronts, on evolving and emerging risks.
Okay, so I'm just going to touch on something you just said there about AI, because we've got a question come through from our audience. So would you consider AI an emerging risk, and what is the risk of investing in AI?
From an insurance standpoint, I definitely consider it an emerging risk. Its applications its full potential is yet to be known. Its applications are yet to be discovered. There's and currently, the way our products are structured, so tech E&O, for example, we implicitly end up covering a lot of AI risks within that. So it's something worth monitoring, because as things start to emerge, and let's say if things start to go wrong with AI, we'll see more behavior in the market that is exclusionary, saying we cover tech E&O, but we do not cover such applications for AI. And that's what creates the opportunity to launch a new vertical, to launch a new product. So at the moment, it's more around monitoring it and getting the capabilities in place to respond to that opportunity when it arises. So at CFC, for example, the innovation team, we've been working on an AI risk calculator. It's pretty simple, but still powerful, because it helps underwriters appreciate the risks their clients are exposed to with just a few data points. They understand the client's location, their applications, the extent to which they're using AI, and that can help underwrite tech E&O today. But in the future, AI risks, if that becomes its own sort of insurance vertical.
Okay, so there's sort of that evolution piece. Maybe we'll come on to that in a minute. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, how do we make sure we're managing these risks adequately? Lauren, what do you think?
You need to collect the data. We all know that data is really important, but getting the granular data and as much data as possible is really important. So coming back to Addy's point around the exclusionary language, you don't know, like if these risks are implicitly included in the policies, you don't know which policies are already included in it and which policies aren't. So capturing the granularity of those perils is key to understanding your risks and actually identifying what your opportunity is around building new products to tackle certain perils or to focus on a certain peril. So if you take things like in terrorism, the traditional political violence market, that they have all of their different coverage, whether it's political violence, strikes, riots, civil commotions, I can't remember. I've just all these coverages have just come out of my head. But you're not necessarily capturing that granularity of coverages under terrorism in all the rest of your policies. That you're adding terrorism to a DNF policy or a cargo policy. you're just having a flag for terrorism. You're not capturing the granularity of those. So therefore, there's a risk that they're implicitly included because you did, or you're not necessarily identifying which are covered and which are not. So you can't develop those scenarios that you need to help you manage your risks. So like collecting the data and developing scenarios around your data points that you've got, what's included, what's not included, they're really key to helping you understand and manage that risk and actually close the gaps on that risk rather than just straightforward excluding them. Can you have an add-on policy? Can you develop a policy that's going to give a better level of coverage to your client that's going to not just exclude them or not just limit their coverage? It might be something that's really important to them.
Right, so it's not just about protecting the balance sheet. It's about actually identifying it as an opportunity to specifically call it out at a detailed level and make sure that you're not covering it if you don't understand the risk. B, if you do understand it through the data, that you're covering it in the right way.
Yes.
Right.
If I could build on that, in terms of how I would think of ways in which the industry can address emerging risks, there's a lot of overlap in the way I think about it with Lauren, but I'd say there's three things we can do. Firstly, we can change what we underwrite. And that's, as Lauren said, we can sort of add in new coverages. We can create new products that don't exist today. And that's effectively changing what we underwrite. On the other hand, we can change how we underwrite. So I gave the example of this AI risk calculator when it comes to tech risks for CFC. Maybe it's, so on cyber, for example, we have a proactive offering where we actually monitor the potential client from the moment we've quoted the risk to actually when we've taken them on. So changing what we underwrite, how we underwrite, and then lastly, how we manage our exposures. And that's exactly as Lauren said, in terms of ensuring, firstly, we're very clear on what we've covered, and then potentially if there's anything we can do to manage and mitigate the risk. So for example, on cyber, one of the elements of our proposition is that we monitor the attack surface of our clients, and if we think there's potential threats, we inform them proactively. So as a result, we're managing the risk by actually feeding them information on a proactive basis so that they can take steps to mitigate any potential losses. So I think as an industry, those are the three levers that we have, the three pillars that we can use in terms of what we do, how we do it, and how we can mitigate the risk.
Okay, so just you touched on the question of technology. Is IoT data helping with that?
It would be one of the signals that would go into it, but there's a lot of information that would feed into such signals. IoT is one sort of high frequency data set that you get, and you can potentially sift through it. There's a lot of data in there, so finding the right signals is important, and it's difficult, but it is possible. But IoT would just be one data set. There's so much data out there, and finding the right data points and the right signals, which have predictive power, is as important as actually having access to all that data.
Okay. So it's I guess not just about the data; it's about the analysis and the insight and everything else that goes with it. Okay, so
I would just also add, it's also building those scenarios and linking them to your other areas of risk that could affect those scenarios. So, for example, if you've got building offshore wind farms at risk of hurricane, you've got climate change, which might be more storms or more frequent or more intense storms. You've got modeling, models for the CAT models that can model the storms, but also modeling the risk engineered assets and how those different turbines are going to react, or how you're going to look at solar farms with increasing frequency of severe thunderstorms. So there's a big climate risk in actually a lot of the scenarios. Drought can lead to low levels in water levels in the Panama Canal. We know that we've got more and more bigger cargo vessels. They're building more and more enormous cargo vessels, which obviously need deeper water. So if you can't get, because of drought, if there's less water in the Panama Canal, then only certain vessels can move through that, and so that you can have impact on global supply chains, assets being in the wrong location. All of these things connect together. And that's the key from like risk management teams and exposure management teams to think about how do all of these things connect. And you can build a range of scenarios. You've got like your realistic ones, but then your extreme stress tests. And you'd hope that you'd have some sort of range that you can develop that will help you get comfortable with that. But it all starts with the data.
Okay, so obviously emerging risks first of all aren't there. Then they emerge, they become small, they become larger and larger, and they scale up. What are the fundamental differences between managing emerging risks in the early sort of startup days versus what happens as the industry scales up, so to meet the challenges on a wider basis? Adi, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Maybe I'll take the example of carbon insurance here, because it's very much in the startup phase of the insurance industry's participation in that area. In the startup phase, it's all about creating a category, because the risks out here are pretty well known for players that operate within the market, but the availability of insurance generally isn't. So to create that category, there's a few things that needs to happen, and it needs to happen well. So firstly, we need to develop the right products, and we do that through thorough market research. So ensuring that we're truly responding to what the clients are worried about, as opposed to only providing the coverages that we're comfortable with. So on carbon, for example, one of our coverages is non-delivery insurance. So we cover investors if they don't receive the credits they were promised for any reason, as opposed to saying that we cover them only for wildfire or only for political risk. So responding to demand in the way that it wants to be responded to is really important to get product market fit right. So developing the right product, building underwriting expertise, because it's an emerging risk. When we barely, I think the first time we heard about a carbon credit was a year ago. And since then, there's been this massive learning curve where we've learned about the market, the nuances, the regulations and pseudo regulations, and the data availability, what we can use as rating factors, what we can't use. So building that underwriting expertise is critical in the early days. And lastly, building the right distribution channels. So get the product right, get the underwriting right, and build this network through which we can underwrite this at scale and offer protection to the market. Because what it does, a product like carbon insurance, it has the strength to attract capital to a market like the voluntary carbon market, which is doing a lot of good for the planet. So there is underlying good behind the protection that we're providing, and it allows investors to come in on a more confident basis to engage the market, to put up more money because their capital is protected. So sorry, that was a pretty long answer to your short question.
No, but it's a very good example. But one of the things I am interested in terms of what you've been talking about there is that the industry can decide to take sort of reactive approach or be proactive. And I think what you're talking about there is the proactive approach to emerging risks. What are the pluses and the minuses of both of those approaches, Adi?
So when you take a proactive approach, like carbon insurance, you're effectively creating a category. And that is hard to do because you're providing supply, but demand doesn't necessarily exist in the exact framework for which you're providing supply. So you need to get that fit right takes time. So doing anything proactively is an iterative approach. You need to try and fail and improve and try again. And that's how it works.
Right.
Whereas the pro of being reactive is usually demand presents itself because it's driven by exclusionary language. So you know what the market wants, and you can hopefully move pretty quickly to supply that to the market. But the real challenge there in being reactive is that you may not be set up for success when the opportunity presents itself. So monitoring those risks is critical so that you're investing in the right capabilities so that when this opportunity emerges, you can really jump on it and make the most of it.
Right. Okay. And I guess, Lauren, from your exposure management point of view, you're seeing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I think, like I've said earlier on, like trying to think about scenarios and hoping that the scenarios that you've thought about drive your business to take that action to get ready so that they're ready to capitalize on the opportunities, like Addy said.
Yeah. I mean, we've had an interesting question from the audience here. How do you collect exposure data for emerging risks if you don't know what the major risk factors are? And how do you internally navigate the technical, IT, and systems challenges of regularly changing data requirements? I think what you said is be agile.
Yeah,
You've got to collect what you can and work with what you've got. Is that right?
Yeah, and also try and utilize technology as much as possible so that you can read the clauses and the slips to automate as much as possible. So if new things come up, you can just search for different language, and hopefully that can populate some different areas in your systems. But I'm not going to pretend it's not easy. It's not difficult, because it's hard, and we're not necessarily set up as a market to do that at the moment.
So regularly changing terms and conditions, does that create all kinds of problems in terms of knowing really what you're covering, because you're changing the policy and moving it through?
Underwriters do a really good job, and you've got great wording teams around the market to understand these risks in a lot of detail, but the systems aren't necessarily there to, and the operational processes to capture that data so that you can actually use it in analysis. That's what's lacking. It's not that people don't know it's there, it's being able to operationally take action on it.
Right.
Without actively have project to go and look at a certain line of business or go and look at certain coverages and pulling that data out as a project when it emerges.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of the product issues and the underwriting issues associated with emerging markets. Let's talk about the underwriting challenges for emerging risks, which are otherwise would inhibit the ability for underwriters to meet those challenges. What are the non-underwriting challenges?
I mean, from my perspective,
start with you on that one.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's making sure we've got the right talent in the market to take this forward. And how do we train that talent effectively to transition them to be ready to take on those reins? We've got a lot of experienced underwriters in the market, but the working pattern has changed. There's a lot more hybrid working and less face-to-face time, or even just, I remember when I started, I would sit in the office, no headphones on, just listen to what was going on around me, and you absorb information in that way. So how can underwriting teams and HR teams make that happen when people are working in a different way is one of the challenges. But I think also bringing in diverse talent from outside of the market. That we're looking at emerging risks. These aren't going to all be, our underwriters are not all going to be insurers thinking about emerging risks. We can think that they should be people from those sorts of industries or those sorts of places that we can tap in. They already have the expertise. Let's bring them into the market and train them on insurance, which is what we're good at.
So interesting. Very often when I'm hosting conferences, I will ask an audience how many people in the audience grew up wanting to be in the insurance industry. And there's always like 1 or 2 out of 200. Oh, there we go, Lauren. But Addy, you told me that you've been in consulting before you came into CFC, and when people come into the industry, they love it for all the reasons, Lauren, you've just talked about there, and Addy, you've talked about before. But getting them in the first place is the difficult bit. Do we need to work harder at our PR as an industry about saying, actually, these are exciting emerging risks? The world is changing, and at the heart of that is insurance, and you can be part of that, making sure we're protecting that. But is that what we should be doing?
I think so. I think so. Insurance is so critical to the functioning of the economy because it enables any risk-taking venture to take risks. And risk-taking ventures are basically corporates. So any company trying to do something new, trying to do something different, they can access protection through the insurance markets. So we're critical in sort of greasing the wheels of capitalism and promoting entrepreneurship, promoting and enabling new technologies. So we have to be at the forefront of these discussions and changing that perception of insurance from, sometimes people think of it as sort of standard or boring, but the more discussions we have on topics like this can actually it can help start to change that perception where, hey, this is dynamic. It's that there's opportunities for new products, and as Lawrence said, it's about bringing in the right people. And I'd actually add to that and say, bring them in and give them the right environment to thrive. So it boils down to topics such as culture, which she touched on, collaboration, and that's what makes great things happen, right? For example, I'm by no means saying our achievements so far have been great, but we've launched a product fairly quickly. But the only reason we've been able to do that is because we've had tremendous support from our senior leaders, from our wordings team, from underwriters, from marketing, actuarial, legal, compliance. So building that collaborative work environment, bringing in the right people, and letting them thrive, that is, I think, what starts to change this perception of insurance.
Showing that it's a that dynamic marketplace where you can actually have an interesting career.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even if you didn't grow up wanting to be in the insurance industry.
Well, I'm not sure.
Sorry.
I'm not sure wanting to be a management consultant is that much better, but
well, look, we've covered a lot of ground in what we've just talked about there. What I'd like to do is just to ask you what you think is the one big thing that you'd advise our audience to remember from this session. If they saw you in a couple of weeks' time, so I saw you on that webinar, and you said to them, what do you remember about all the things we talked about? What would you want that to be? Just so that they, their big takeaway to think about when the webinar's finished. Lauren, ladies first.
I would say, how can you help your business capture and harness your data? Because that's going to be the facilitator of all the stuff that we've been talking about.
Right. It's all about the data, right? Okay. Addy.
I'd say the world is changing rapidly. The geopolitical landscape, the technological landscape, economic landscape, it's evolving at an incredible pace. That creates new risks, but the reason our industry exists is to take on those risks and to absorb them. So no matter which function we're in or which team we're in, if we can spot those opportunities and try something new, push the boundaries a little bit, I think that's what will set us up as an industry to thrive for a long, long time to come.
Okay. I think that's a good point at which to say we've probably covered as much ground as we can in the 30 minutes that's available to us. I'd like to start off by thanking both of you for being very, very insightful on this particular subject, and I'm sure the audience will have learned a lot from what you've talked about today. For our audience, I would remind you to register for next month's webinar, which is on climate change. We're going to do a deep dive into one of these emerging risks of climate change in insurance and how commercial underwriters can weather the storm. In the meantime, thanks to our audience for attending, for the questions that they posed, and from both members of our panel. Lauren, Addy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Tony. I'll be in the audience for the next webinar.
Me too.
Sure. Cheers, mate. Thank you.